absolutely unconscionable.
So we're talking about
God...
we're talking about sort of manslaughter rather than murder, aren't we?
Well, that's a judgment that could only be made by a court or by an inquest, and I don't make that judgment. But this is a tragic and unnecessary finale.
Can I go on to the other revelations you make more about her life?
Yes, indeed.
For instance, you just said there that she wasn't on this sort of downward depressive spiral that we've all assumed her to have been at this point, which is why a lot of people thought she must have committed suicide. In fact, life was on the up for her at the time of her death.
Absolutely.
Can you describe how? What sort of things were happening in her life?
She had been re-signed to do the film from which she was fired the previous June, the film Something's Got to Give. They had re-signed and rehired her at twice the salary. Dean Martin was coming back to be her co-star. There were 2 other films ready to go, and in addition to that, another musical film based on the play A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which was to have its music written by Julie Stein, who had written her songs for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
So
she was due in New York at a meeting the following Thursday, in fact, to discuss that project.
That is a real revelation. So her career was on the up. What about her private life?
Her private life had never been more secure and happier. The day, alas, that she was buried was to have been the day of her remarriage to Joe DiMaggio. Following their divorce 8 years earlier and her remarriage to Arthur Miller, they hadn't seen much of one another. But when she divorced Arthur Miller in 1961, she and Joe DiMaggio were reunited, and he was indeed a faithful and attentive friend, and they planned to be remarried on August 8th, and were due in New York together the following day.
Donald, what was her relationship with the Kennedys, Donald?
Her relationship with the Kennedys is virtually non-existent. This is the biggest bit of rubbish that has ever been foisted by unscrupulous, fabricating writers upon a gullible public eager to see icons and heroes dragged through the mud. Heroes, especially in relationship to Robert Kennedy. Marilyn Monroe and Robert Kennedy were never lovers. It's very easy to establish this if one does one's homework as a researcher and a biographer carefully. They met on 4 occasions, each of which they were surrounded by very many people. They were cordial acquaintances. Marilyn Monroe, contrary to popular expectation or myth, was not a witless, stupid, shallow woman. She had considerable interest in the quest and reach for civil rights at the time in the United States. We have many letters and papers from her that give witness and testify to that. And that explains her social contacts with the Attorney General. They were never lovers. Anyone who had the remotest acquaintance with either Robert Kennedy or Marilyn Monroe is torn between laughter and tears over these ridiculous, unfounded allegations.
But what about the affair?
Ever any intimacy between them?
And what about the affair between herself and President Kennedy? Is that true?
If by an affair one means a more or less protracted intimacy in which the principals meet, certainly more than once over a period of time, then we cannot call the relationship between Marilyn Monroe and John Kennedy an affair. What we do know is that on Saturday, March 25th, 1962, they did share a bedroom for a brief time at the Palm Springs, California home of the singer and actor Bing Crosby.
Donald, very briefly...
Other than that, there is no evidence for their ever having met or been intimate. We have, as I say, witness not only from Marilyn, but from her closest advisors and friends, as we do from the president.
Donald, very briefly, before we run out of time, a lot of people who haven't had a chance to read the book here in Britain yet will say, okay, you're blowing a lot of the theories that we've learned about Marilyn so far. Why should we believe you more than any other biographer? What have you had access to that nobody else has?
35,000 pages of personal, professional, and government documents, and I simply invite the reader to look at the 65, 70 pages of endnotes and documentation that the book contains. I was fortunate enough to have access not only to private files, but also to personal files and letters and papers. In addition to that, it's very important to see the lack of substantiation which other writers have offered with their theories prior to now. This has been called a revisionist story of Marilyn Monroe. It is so only by virtue of telling the truth.
Donald,
and I believe
thank you
that
very
at last
much.
what we can say is one must tell the truth even at the risk of saying good things.
That's unusual.
Yeah.
Donald, thank you very much. I've now got a whacking great book to read on my holidays. I've just got to find a holiday long enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Well, we have with us Oscar Moore, who's the editor of Screen International. Oscar, what's your reaction to what you've just heard?
Well, I think it's another sad chapter in a way. It was very surprising to see the conspiracy theories being thrown out and the incompetence theories come in, but actually it seems to make a lot more sense than a lot of the Kennedy
It does in a way, doesn't
stories that have been floating around for years.
Why was she so incredibly special that we're still sort of reviewing biographies of her all this time later?
Well, I think the tragedy is part of it. There's an innocent quality about Marilyn Monroe, and there's the charisma that nobody else has managed to kind of marry. You see Madonna trying to do versions of Marilyn Monroe, and they always seem too professional, too sophisticated. There was something incredibly guileless about her charm, and clearly the sort of people who surrounded her seem to be not only controlling her, but out of control, and I think that's all wraps up. I don't think this will do any harm to her image in a way, because it completes her story as a victim of the people who surrounded her.
And here we are, 30 years on, still talking about. She would have been 67, I think, this year.
I know, in many ways, icons need to die at a certain point to be kind of transfixed in time the way she has been. But I don't think this will change the way people view her. It will just increase the sadness in a way.
That's right.
Perhaps tied up a few loose ends. Oscar, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, our special guest today first visited England from his home